Well, good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining us for this webinar called Devops Platforms for the Evolving Enterprise. We will have a quick demo by Gert Vanesse and Eddie Powers, our SVP, will actually getting presented. Well, before we begin, please be sure that you're mute for the duration of the event. If you have any kind of question, type a message in the question box, and we will be glad to answer all your questions. Recording the full webinar will be put online, so we will be able to send you an email if you want it. Otherwise, will be in our YouTube channel. The webinar out will be, of course, Devops Platform for the Evolving Enterprise, then a walkthrough, and then finally Q&A. A little presentation of Eddie. He's an experienced IT professional. He has a master's degree in computer science from the University of Brussels. And for the last 25 years, he specialized in application and service lifecycle management. Eddie is a respected coach within organizations to implement agile, lean IT, and performance-based service management principles. I will pass over the control to Eddie directly. Eddie?
Yes, thank you, Sarah.
Great, of course. Yes, perfectly.
Okay, do I need just 1 second? Just let me know when you see my presentation.
Okay. Okay, all yours. Yes.
Okay. Well, thank you, everybody. This is actually a replay of the session that I've given at IP Expo a few weeks ago, where I was talking around the focus of getting applications and delivery of applications, getting actually better lean processes within it, get it running more smoothly, and actually doing the delivery process in a more continuous or / at the speed of business way. Now, before going into that a little bit deeper, let's actually see what the key delivery challenges really are in most of the organizations that we encounter. And you can group those into 3 key buckets. At the middle, you actually see challenges that are related to deployment. So things around how can we increase the quality of what we deploy on a particular environment, or even worse, in production? How can we reduce the lead time of the delivery process and the deployment process from an end-to-end point of view? How could we actually increase agility and maintainability of the deployment scripts and lines of code that we have within the organization? And related to the 3 above, I think a very important one is point 6. How can we orchestrate across platforms, knowing that a lot of organizations currently are in a transition of searching for new sourcing platforms? A lot of organizations are moving from the mainframe, from the next platforms, over to virtual machines, to containers, to cloud environments. So they actually have a bunch of scripts, but they would like to see how can we actually transition those scripts and actually move them onto the new platform, and that actually links to point 5. But also, when they are still in a transition period, you see a lot of applications spanning multiple platforms. And that's very often where, for a lot of organizations, the manual effort comes into play. And when manual effort comes into play, that leads them to point 3, then quality starts to suffer, because there are risk of errors and risk of things that are not being done consistently. And that can actually slow down the process, which again links to 4. So you see, this is just one grouping of challenges, which I call deployment related. The second category is around execution. The process of how to execute the application delivery process end to end. And that goes from managing the demand, doing the development, doing the testing, and doing the deployment onto the service platforms. So the questions and the challenges there is, how do you orchestrate this process across the different teams? And what we, in the past couple of years, is that a lot of teams have given themselves, or a lot of organizations have given their teams the flexibility to pick and choose their own tooling, but as a result, there is a challenge for many organizations to orchestrate across these different teams, but also across the different tools that these teams use. So I see in organizations multiple revision repositories. I see multiple build and deployment tools. I see multiple project management tools, and as a result, it becomes very difficult to just get a good oversight as to where are we in the process and how do you actually handle over the content that was created from one team over to the next one, which links to point 8. How do you actually facilitate the collaboration and the sharing of assets across the different stakeholders, so being development, QA, and operations? And it's particularly in this area where DevOps actually plays a big role in its existence. People would like to get a better collaboration between development and operations, but there is a level of distrust, let's put it that way, between development and operations, because development feels that operations actually is deploying too slowly and they would like to get more control to actually do it faster. And operations actually distrust development because they say, hey, I just get a runbook and we need to execute the runbook, but it's not always well documented. With as a result, there are only a handful of people being able to really do the work. So there are some challenges in that space, definitely. This particularly comes true when you actually are dealing with multiple platforms. So how do you actually do that across platforms, but also how do you plan and schedule that across platforms? Because very often those platforms are managed by different teams, and you need to plan when there can be downtime or no downtime, when are the servers being available for such operations. So that needs to be scheduled, and the more platforms, the more complex this becomes. And then finally, if you're looking at the top, what actually is a huge challenge, at least at the executive level, is how do you actually get end-to-end visibility and insight into where are we in the process, and how do you actually assess impact in this process? How do you know whether there are bottlenecks in this process? Because it's often gluing information from different tools into a spreadsheet and then trying to make sense out of it. So it's by far not real time. And secondly, it's not always accurate either, because you don't always have the possibility to interpret the data in a correct and cohesive way. Now, at the end of the day, every organization that I met so far are looking to maximize business value. They try to actually speed up the process because they would like to satisfy the business and deliver faster, or at least at a speed of business. But what I've seen is that a lot of organizations, they actually have initiatives being driven from different angles. And the two common ones is either it's based on the development or the product teams or the delivery teams, and their focus is around increasing delivery speed and increasing agility. So their main focus is around collaboration and integration between development, QA, and release processes, where build is predominantly focusing around deploying and releasing towards a development or a QA environment. So that they like to automate that in order to be able to speed up. On the other hand, you see a lot of initiatives being driven from the operations side, and operations is predominantly focusing around the service delivery process, so reducing total cost of ownership and increasing efficiency. Now, the good thing, regardless of where the driver is for this DevOps initiative or this improvement initiative, is that both types of initiatives, they all share a common theme, which is try to increase coordination, try to increase collaboration and integration between the different stakeholders, automate what can be automated, try to standardize your processes and your models, and get insight and get auditability and governance from an end-to-end point of view. The only thing that is different is their focus is slightly different. So when you're looking at organizations and the transitions that they are making, you see that most of the organizations today are transitioning their application or IT architectures and their associated delivery processes to move from what I call a left to right move. So they're rebalancing their landscape and their architectures from something that is described on the left-hand side as being highly interconnected. And as a result, since it's highly interconnected, the number of changes can be limited just because you need to assess the impact. This is where ITIL thrives. This is where there is a very top-down process of proving changes, doing the impact analysis, linking it to releases, then developers starting to build on it. So it's a top-down release management structure. Very common still waterfall-driven, because there is a lot of legacy in there, and sometimes also a lot of risk involved. And the organizational structure is very much IT-oriented. That means you have a demand team, delivery team, an operations team, a testing team, and so on. Very common initiatives in that particular space are driven from operations because they need to keep the lights on, and they actually try to secure the operations environment as much as possible. Now, with the push from the business to deliver at the speed of business, speed up the delivery process, organizations need to change their architectures to what you hear the modern application delivery process being loosely coupled, being frequent changes, ideally continuous changes, adopting agile principles so that you can release more frequently, having a bottom-up release manager approach where you actually work with changes and improvements that are being bundled and tested and then being put into production more frequently, sometimes a few times a day. And it's where delivery or the product team actually is the leading driver for change because it's a change model where the development actually takes the lead. Now, reality is that most of organizations are transitioning from left to right, but it takes a while. Changing IT architectures is a very complicated matter, and for some organizations, it will take decades to do so, and that's why I often don't say it's a move from left to right, it's a rebalancing from left to right, and the question is whether or not you're going to get rid of all of this, but you would like to get as much to the right-hand side as possible because it gives you more flexibility of updating and delivering at a higher speed. This is, for example, what Gartner calls also having bi-modal capabilities. You need to support this type of architectures as well as these type of architectures. Now, what you see in the market of DevOps is that a lot of organizations, they would like to adopt DevOps practices, they would like to automate, they would like to collaborate and integrate. But most of the DevOps tools today are very good in supporting the right-hand side architecture. That means loosely coupled, continuous release models, bottom-up release management, agile methodologies. But if you look at some of the recent reports from Forrester, a vast amount of organizations are still struggling with these applications and are releasing once a quarter still, or at least more than once a month. So that means that they're far from being ready to actually adopt DevOps. So very, very often organizations say, okay, we can't do it, we need to wait. And what we are actually telling Clarive is that you can start today. We actually, with Clarive, we deliver a DevOps solution that supports the evolving or transitioning enterprise. That means that we support these type of architectures as well as these type of architectures, and we support all the different tools that are taking part in that process, so that we can smoothly allow you to transition from left to right and start with your DevOps initiatives today. So you can start with collaboration, you can start with automation, you can start with end-to-end insight without being fully agile and loosely coupled in terms of the architectures. So a little bit more around top-down and bottom-up release management. As I explained before, in the traditional way, you see release management being driven from the top downwards. That means you have projects as well as the change requests that got approved by the change board for the various applications. And once approved, they can be associated with a release, and then that release, as well as any other ticket, follows a life cycle. And at certain points, the release needs to be built and deployed onto a platform or an environment, and then to another platform all the way to production. But development only starts to modifying code as soon as the release actually has been approved and accepted to be in execution. In a bottom-up release management approach, you work the reverse. It's the development teams that work on new initiatives, new innovative features, as well as fixing of existing ones. So they work on their platform. They actually create changes. They put those in change sets. They test that in isolation on the various platforms. And at some point, if it's actually tested in isolation on each of the platforms, they can actually then move that onto the higher platforms. And very often at some point, and here in this example, it's in QA, it will be merged together into what they call either a super change set or a release, and it's then all these changes that got approved by development will move and traverse the remaining part of the life cycle all the way to production. And ideally, that is triggered, and if it satisfies all the quality gates, it will move to production very quickly. This is good for what I call a bottom-up release management approach driven by development for the right-hand side of architectures. Now, what we see in many of the bigger organizations that we work with is that most of these organizations actually have more of a kind of a hybrid release management approach, where you have a blend between the top-down for the legacy as well as the bottom-up for the more customer-facing new applications or revamped applications. And so you have the traditional applications and the agile applications, and at some point you would like to put that into a release and make sure that it works for every kind. And it's in this context that you see, while you're in this transition and you have a hybrid release managed approach, you need to have a tool that supports the top as well as at the bottom. And this is exactly what we do with Clarive. We actually have a single tool DevOps platform for the evolving enterprise. That means we allow organizations to manage not only the applications and services, but also the provisioning logic and the deployment logic. And we actually allow collaboration between all the stakeholders, so development, QA, and operations. And we do that across all the platforms, whether it's a database platform, a mainframe platform, proprietary platforms like an ERP system, cloud platforms, mobile, or open systems. And what we do is we support initiatives of both operations and development by supporting automation. So we allow you to automate anything that can be automated. So that means that there is no need to go outside because the tool doesn't support it to create an additional script. We facilitate coordination, collaboration, and integration, and those two go hand in hand, especially knowing that a lot of organizations have allowed teams to come up with their own tooling. So integration between existing tooling is key. And linked to that is that you can actually get insight into what's happening. And this is what you see here on the left-hand side. So with Clarive, we give you instant and dynamic insight without ripping and replacing what you have. So Clarive can do a lot of process activities on its own, but if you have a Jira for bug tracking, or if you have a Chef for deploying, or if you have a Jenkins for doing build, we actually can work with all of these tools without having you to just lose the investment that you made, and then you can make a decision that you can glue around. You get your DevOps suite and the deployment pipeline suite under control, automated and collaborated, and then afterwards you can see whether or not there are ways to further improve it. And this gives you insight both for the development teams as well as the operational teams, which in essence is what DevOps is all about, facilitating collaboration between development and operations. So final slide that I'm going to present before I turn it over to Gert, because the best way to actually show how this works in practice is to just see it in practice in real life. So that means that as a platform for DevOps, we allow organizations to link, either create it from within Clarive or integrate it from external tools, incidents, problems, changes, projects into releases. We actually manage the dependencies so that you have impact analysis and tracking from an end-to-end point of view. We allow life cycles to be defined and workflows. And during transitions, we can create what we call rules. It's a pipeline rule. And this pipeline rule can be seen as code. So that's why I use the term delivery as code. You can also test and QA the build, the deploy, and the provisioning process as part of your QA cycle, which I believe also from a QA perspective and a quality perspective, it's an important thing often missed in QA cycles today, because there is a lot of focus around quality assurance for content, business logic content, but not the provisioning and deployment content. So we deliver as code, and as Gert will explain, every rule that we have in Clarive actually provides the logic for doing the preparation, so the building and the staging, the execution or the run, where the deployment is done to the various platforms that are participating. And then in the post step, you can actually facilitate the cleanup or the C&D updates that are needed. And all the way you can actually use quality gates, etc., to actually integrate well with automated testing. And finally, in the same rule, you actually can manage the push forward or the move forward, as well as the rollback strategy into a single rule. That gives you one single rule to maintain your forward and backward strategy, as well as across all platforms. The last thing that is on this slide is that we not only do that across all platforms, but also across all environments, because an environment is an abstraction that we created that allows you to specify, okay, before you execute the rule, what are the specifics for the dev environment, the test environment, the QA environment, and so on. So this information is merged into the rule. That means that the single rule will be used across all the platforms and across all environments, which gives you a single source of maintaining and updating, which gives you maximum agility and maintainability. I think that's enough for me to explain what we do conceptually. I think what would be good now is to transfer the control to Geert, and then Geert can actually give a demo. So let's see if make presenter Geert van Estelen, and then he will take over from here.
Thank you, Eddie. Good morning. Let me share my desktop. So looking back at one of the last slides that Eddie was showing you, I'm going to connect with that in the tool. So what I'm presenting here to you is in fact our initial process model, our sample process model. It's the model that I will use for the demo. So in that model you can see the operational part where you have the incident, problem and change management, and you can see what Eddie had in his slides as the top-down release management way of working and the bottom-up release management side in the tool, both supported. In Clarive, what we see here in the boxes, we call them topic categories. And what is very important topic category in Clarive is the change set. The change set is what we deploy. The change set is what we deploy either individually or grouped or related with multiple change sets to a release or a sprint. So in the top-down model, we have releases that get scheduled, change requests that participate in that release that get scheduled for that release, and they will be brought to the production environment together with all the change sets related to the change requests. In the top-down, in the bottom-up way of working, we have development that know that things are ready, and they deploy their changes, their change sets to the next environment when they are ready. And at a certain point, they will group their changes into sprints and deploy multiple changes to an environment like UAT, like pre-production, and also for sure to production. So these are topic categories in Clarive. And for each of these topic categories in Clarive, we can define a lifecycle, a workflow. So we have all of our topic categories that I've shown you in the model, and here we have the workflow, like for a change set going from new over assigned to in development, in QA, ready for pre-production, things like that until it's deployed. So now going to the tool, how this reflects in the tool, we have in the tool the topics menu where you can see in fact whatever that was in a box in the model that I've showed is now available here in the tool, and I can go and see my releases in motion. So I just select the topic category release and I see all my releases in motion, and I can see that in the Kanban view so that I can see where exactly my release is in my life cycle, in my workflow. So going from new over assigned to in development to the QA environment, to the deployed status, I can see where my releases are, and I can also see that there are physical environments related to that particular status. So here I have development, I have QA, pre-production. Means also when I go from the ready for QA status to the in QA status, I will have a deployment that will have, I will have a build of my changes, and I will have a deployment in the QA environment that will be done by Clarive. Some of these statuses or transitions between statuses are manual actions, but the tool has also a rule engine, so we act on status changes. So it means that we can automate these transitioning. A release, no one will do a manual transitioning of a release from in development to ready for QA. A release will get in the in development status once the first change set related to that release gets in the in-dev state. It will get into the ready for QA status once all of the related change sets get in the ready for QA status. And that is, in fact, automated by our powerful ruling system that we have in Clarive. So looking here at these environments, we can see them also in a way like this, and having here our applications that we use, that we have defined in Clarive. We have our environments, and we can see which releases are currently for which application in what environment, and we have an indication whether that release is completely deployed or it partially deployed. Means like here for this release 12.0, we have currently, from the 3 change sets that are part of that release, only 2 of them are deployed into the QA environment. In the pre-production environment, we can see also incomplete releases, and one thing we shouldn't see is the production environment incomplete releases. So here, this is really not a good situation. We should have complete releases, and that's one thing that we can enforce with the tool. We can just enforce that from a certain environment on. We don't want individual change sets to be deployed. We want complete releases, complete sprints to be deployed, so that we are sure that we have a complete deployment of a sprint and a release, and not incomplete deployments, because here we have deployed individual change sets and we didn't deploy them all, so we have an incomplete release in our pre-production environment for the Acme CRM application. So going back here and going to the details of a release. So when I have here the 2192 release, for instance, which is, we see that for each of these topic categories, we collect data. So we collect data like the start date, pip date, the pickup date, the description, and we collect also data with the relationships that we have between all of our topic categories. So from a release, we have the environment plan that was built. That was built by environment requests. So we can see the plan start date, end date for development, test, QA, pre-production. We can see it's got relationships with projects, with change sets, with change requests, and we can navigate in the tool. We can just go from the release, which is the highest level, and see, well, that project, mainframe app 12.0, give me the details about that project. And we can see that that project has a different form and it's got different data collected. And we can see that it's got quality gates defined, quality gates that have to be met. If these quality gates will not be met, we won't be able to deploy any of that project to the production environment. That is mandatory to be met before we can deploy. It's got relationship with change sets. And the change set has relationship with the development. It has revisions that have been related to that change set. And from here in this change set, I can see the revisions that are related to that change. And I can see even what the difference reporting, what has been changed in what file for that revision. So I can see that for all the revisions related, I can see what lines have been changed, what line have been added to the code without leaving my Clarive. I don't have to go to an IDE of a developer to see what was changed. And I can see that that change set has a relation with the change request. And that change request, it can be created in Clarive, or it can come from an external source. It's well possible that we go to in Clarive and we have a form to create change requests. We just go to create and we fill in the blanks, the title, the description, the owner, the type of change. But it's well possible that customers already have ServiceNow, they have Jira, they have a remedy, and they might want to consolidate all of their changes into Clarive and take these change requests through the development and deployment cycle. So therefore, we need to set up a bi-directional integration with tools like a ServiceNow or Jira. So here I have a ServiceNow instance. When I create in ServiceNow a change request, I can say, well, this is my November 3rd CR, and this is my CR, November. Just creating a change request in ServiceNow that has its own lifecycle, that has its own workflow in ServiceNow defined. Once it gets created, I will show you that. So this change request in ServiceNow is now in the open status. It's got a workflow pending, work in progress, and some closed statuses. But in the meantime, since we want this change request to go into development, to relate revisions to it, to build and deploy the changes and bring them to development, QA, and the other environments with Clarive, we have created in Clarive, because of the creation of that change request in ServiceNow, also a change request. And we have created, we have taken the title and description and whatever field that we define or that we map, we can take from ServiceNow. And we have also stored the ServiceNow number that this change request in Clarive is related to. Now, this change request in Clarive is in status new, and it will go through the statuses, through the workflow that has been defined for change request in Clarive. So it will go in development and ready for QA and things like that. And we want to report back, and we want to synchronize certain of these statuses with the originating tool. So when someone starts working on a change request in Clarive, it will be assigned to him. We want to reflect that in ServiceNow, that this change request is no longer in the open state, but it is work in progress. Someone has picked it up and has started working on it. So we want to report back on that. So when I just assign here and start working on change request, I will get a change request and the status assigned in Clarive. When I go back to ServiceNow and I look here at my change request that I have created here, you will see that now this status has changed to work in progress. And this is the way that we work. We just have milestone statuses defined in Clarive that will be synchronized with statuses from the originating tool. I've shown here now this with ServiceNow, but it could also be shown with Jira or with Remedy. It's just the same way of working. We consolidate in Clarive, we take change request with the change sets related possibly to release or a sprint, deploy everything into the environments up to the production environment, and report back synchronized status with the originating tool. So this is just the first example of how we can integrate with other tools. Another example of how we can create topics in Clarive without having to fill all the blanks in form is with our change sets. I've said that a change set is in fact what we deployed. So the change set has the revisions that it holds. Here I have my applications and I have my JIT repositories. So here I have my revisions that are available to be built and deployed. When I go here to my change sets, I can take this change set, edit it, and take, in fact, the revisions that are ready to be deployed. I can just drag and drop them into my change set and take that change set through its life cycle, the life cycle that has been defined for that change set from ready for development, in development, ready for QA, in QA. So I can take them with these revisions through that life cycle. The deployment and the builds will be done when it goes to each of the environments. But it is well possible that we have developers that will start working on changes and that we just want to relate their commits to an existing change set, or to create a new change set when one doesn't exist for that particular application. So I have here a small application in my development environment where it's just an index.jsp file, and let's make a change to that and build and also and start deploying that to the development environment. So here from my index file that I have in my IDE, which is Eclipse in my case, I can just say, well, let's make some changes, and we are the 3rd of November. Save this, and commit my change as a developer to the repository. So I say this is my November 3rd revision, and I will commit this to my repository. Here we go. Now I have committed this to my repository. Going back to Clarive, here it is, and looking at my change sets, I've got here a November 3rd change set that holds my revision that I just created. You see that I deleted that line, that I have changed that line. That's exactly what I have done. And I've got that change set in the status in dev. In the meantime, since this is done through our ruling system, I have trapped in fact the repository update and created the change set, but I have also now a job running. Looking at the monitor, I have a job running that will in fact build and deploy for my development environment. So it has checked out the changes. It detected that it had to build a WAR file. It has done a Maven build. Here you can see it has done a Maven build with the POM file it found. It has data backup, and it has deployed to my Tomcat server my newly built WAR file. So looking here at my development environment, this was the version I had. Just refreshing the view here. You'll see that now I have the newly with the line that disappeared and with the new date. I have the newly built index.jsp file that has been deployed to my development environment. Back in Clarive, when I look at my monitor, I have in fact another job that is waiting for approval. Why is this? Because I had a change set that it was in dev. Because of the deployment, within my deployment, I can run some automated testing. And when everything is okay, I can move on and change the status of my change set. And I have done that and have changed it to ready for QA. And because that change set came into the ready for QA status, it was picked up by a rule that has kicked off, in fact, a build for QA. And looking at my monitor, I can see that it has already built for QA, but it didn't deploy for the QA. Because maybe I have my automated testing that is running, but it's also possible that I need to do some manual checking. And I can't just say you can deploy anyhow to QA. So you can build for QA, but the actual deployment to the server in QA can only be done after I have done some manual checking and I have given my approval. So I just approve this, let's say here, approve, and my job will continue, and it will actually deploy the same version as I had in development. It will deploy it into my QA environment using the same pipeline. This job that gets generated is generated by the same pipeline. There is no difference in my pipeline for development and my pipeline for QA. It's only the variables for the environment that make the job different, but the pipeline is the same one that I use. So now I have deployed that to the QA environment. Looking at my QA environment, which is here, that's my QA environment. You will see that now. That was the version I had. I have the same version as I have in my development environment. This brings us, in fact, to the deployment port in Clarive. And looking at my applications, I have here applications that are ready for QA. And for that application, I have changesets ready for QA. I've got a release, a project, which is a grouping of changesets. So when I want to deploy that changeset now to the QA environment, I can say promote to the QA environment. When I want multiple changesets related to a project, I can promote a project and I'll get, in fact, not only a single changeset, but all changesets. I can do the same for a release. Say promote that to QA. And by doing that, I'll get, in fact, all the changesets related to release. But what we see here is that the panel that we get to deploy is exactly the same as it is for a release or for a project or for a single changeset. And if I'm trying to promote a changeset, I can also say, well, I've got other changesets ready. I can drag and drop them, and these will be deployed together. Also, for that particular release here, I will, in fact, have a date and time proposed to deploy. That date and time proposed to deploy is coming from calendars. We have these calendars in the system defined, and these are called job slots. For instance, for quality assurance, there were no limitations. You can deploy at any time of day, except on Wednesday. Only urgent deployments between 8 and midnight are allowed. But if you would be looking at a production environment, it's more strict. You can't deploy between 5 and 8 in the evening. You can only deploy between midnight and 5. There are only urgent with special approval deployments can be done between 8 and midnight. So we will this is a calendar that is valid for all jobs that will be run to deploy to production. But it's well possible that we have some critical application that needs a different calendar. So we can say, well, for all jobs going to production, but for that particular application, I need a different calendar. Or we can have some critical servers and say, well, for that particular server, we need to have a different calendar. And in Clarive, when we have to deploy, we will mix and match all these calendars to find the ideal timing to deploy the application to the environment. And we can also see what calendars have been applied. I only have one for quality assurance, but if I would have mixed to mix and match multiple calendars, I would see it here. And that is because we know exactly what we will deploy and where we will deploy it to, because I will take the release here and look at the dependencies. I can see the servers involved, I can see the revisions involved, I can see the projects involved, the applications involved. So based on all that data that we keep in our CMDB, the relationships that we keep, we can just find the best slot feasible for that particular release to be deployed. The deployment will be done by a job, and that job will be generated by a pipeline rule, which brings us to the rules system and the main complete pipeline that I've been using here. But any pipeline that we have has, in fact, the same way of working. It's always a 5-step rule that we define. So looking at our pipeline rules, the main complete pipeline, I have, in fact, 5 steps. A check, an init, a pre, a run, and a post. It is the goal to have as few pipelines as possible, because these pipelines, as Eddie has shown in the slide, are agnostic. It means they just are deploying to any environment, whether it's development, QA, pre-production, it's the same pipeline. They are treating also all the applications, and they also work treating all of the natures, whether it's Word, jar files, Java, mainframe, C++, SQL files. They're all in the same pipeline, and the pipeline is in fact agnostic, means that we have here in our configuration items, we have our projects defined. These projects, they are defined here. Looking at, for instance, the complex app, we have our repositories, but we have here these variables on a common level, and we have overrides and additions for all of the specific environments. So for the common, we have a DB instance, which is the banking web underscore dev. In QA, this will be banking underscore QA. In the common, we just deploy to a single server. In the production environment, we deploy to multiple servers. So that's how we set this up. This is taken into consideration in the rules, and we have this variable substitution. So with a singular rule, we will deploy to all of the environments that we have specified for the project. So these 5 steps are important. In the check, we will check, like you have seen for projects, we have quality gates. We will check if all quality gates have been met. In the init state, we have these calendars. It's possible that I push the button today to deploy, but it will only run on Saturday morning. So in an init, I could have an intermediate status that says deployment pending. And this means that I know that someone has pushed the button to deploy, but actually it didn't deploy yet. The most important ones are the pre and the run. So the run step is in fact what will be executed when the scheduled time is there. It means that this will run in fact in the deployment window in the job slot that has been defined. And we might have limited time between midnight and 5 or between midnight and 3. And so we will try to limit what we execute there to the deployment steps. To the only thing that we would like to do there is deploy, and we would like to prepare as much as we can in the pre-step. So looking at my run step for my war file, what I did is just deploy my war file, and here you see the variables that are related to the project and to the environment, so that my rule is agnostic. And in the pre-step for my war file, what I did when I detected that it was a war file, we just did a Maven build. And for each of the affected war files, we took a backup. So we have built, we have taken the backup, we have prepared as much as we can in the pre-step so that we can limit, in fact, the run step to the actual deployment or to the actual rollback, because that's also a possibility that we have built in our ruling system. We already indicate when we are building the rule what steps we would need to execute again if we would be rolling back and if we would be taking off a version from a certain environment. In the post step, we will just update CMDB and status and make some status changes, like you can see with the changeset that I have used to deploy. If you just look at this changeset, at the end we have changed the status to in QA. So this changeset is now in QA because it was successfully deployed into the QA environment with the job that was generated once the changeset got in the ready for QA status. So this is about the deployment of Clarive. So we have seen changesets, we have seen deployments, we have seen that we can go from the end-to-end with Clarive, from the creation of an incident, a defect, the registration of a bug they want for an application up to the delivery and production, which means that we collect a lot of data in the process, and we want to present that data to the users that use the tool, and we want to present that data that is related to the role that they have in the organization. That's why in Clarive we have dashboards. We have dashboards that are role-based for the incident manager, problem manager, change manager, the release manager, operations manager. And these dashboards, they are made available by the administrator, but they are configurable for the user. They can be, they are configurable by the user, they are interactive, and they are real-time. So it means that the user can configure that and say, well, this is a bar chart, but I'd rather see it in a pie chart. You can just change that, ask for a pie chart. It will immediately present the data in a pie chart. This is interactive, means the user doesn't want to see the status new, he doesn't want to see the status resolved. He can toggle them off, and immediately we will adapt the pie chart presented to the toggled on and toggled off statuses that the user has done. So you can toggle them back on, toggle them back on. And all of these, the dashboards, all of these graphics are drillable. It means here I have 10 incidents in the pending CR state. Clicking on that, it will take me to the list of incidents on the pending CR. I can just see the detail of that incident. I can see it's related to a change request. I can see that change request is currently in the ready for deployment. There is already a change set related to it, so there are really people starting working on this. So like here I go, in fact, I can go to my change set. I can see that there is already a revision added. So in the beginning, I went down from my highest level release to my lowest level change request incident. Here I go from incident up to my highest level release, which gives you, in fact, that possibility to drill down in the tool, to have that traceability, to know exactly what has been happening. Same thing is we just keep track of every status change, we keep track of every activity of every field change in the tool, which gives you a great visibility, a great way to report on exactly what is happening in your organization. And these dashboards are, in fact, dashboards that we can have on a role-based level, like here, We can have them related to a single application. So we have these dashboards related to the banking web here, or we can have them even related to a single tool, a single topic, excuse me. So for instance, this release, at the bottom of that release, I have here a dashboard that will report only on about the data related to that release. So what the incompleted work by type, the Changesets, change request for that release only. How long has that release been in scope definition? How long has that release been in scheduling or in development? So that's data for a single topic. So we have these multi-level dashboards. These dashboards are also defined in the system as rules. All of our rules are completely versioned in the system. We can just roll back to any version of any rule, whether it's a dashboard, it's a form, it's a pipeline rule, it's an event-driven rule, it's a web service rule. All of them, our assets are versioned, and we can roll back. We can do blame reporting on it, and all that is available with the tool. And this was, for me, in fact, the overview that I wanted to give during my demo. And I think we are opening up for questions now.
Thank you, Gert. Thank you so much. I do have one question. In the demo, I can see revision from Git being deployed. We have version, and do we need to migrate?
No, not at all. I mean,
okay.
the sample that I've used during my demo is JIT, but it could be Subversion, could be Plastic SCM, could be about any source code repository that to drag and drop your revisions from into a Changeset. You don't need to migrate to JIT. We use JIT for our internal assets, but that is not a mandatory source code repository for any of the development of customers.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other questions? No? Okay, well, I will thank you all for your assistance today and for your time. Thank you, Eddie. Thank you, Gert, for the wonderful demo. Eddie, for the wonderful presentation. And hope to see you all for the next one. Keep you posted. Thank you. Bye.